Alright, let's go back to finishing up this hill. So I noticed I'm going to need to transform this a little bit, make it a little bit bigger and just distort it in perspective a little bit more. So I'm going to scale this up. Then I'm going to skew it or distort it. Point it a little bit higher, yeah. That feels better to me. Yep. So I'm going to organize my element here, group it, and rename it hill. Now I'm going to hit up that edge line here, but first, one thing I noticed is I want to rework this this edge here. I'm not too happy with it. I'm going to take a nice hard brush, play with the silhouette a little bit. Yeah, just paint it back in and start going back at it. Really try to nail the shape of this thing. We don't need those stairs, so we're probably going to paint that out. But just to get the right shape, take some time. And we'll put some shrub elements in there too to help that edge, but for now we want to get it as close to what we have in mind. I want to break it up a little bit too, not to keep it super smooth and look like it's cut out. So just that difference in shape there. And some breakup will really help sell this shape. So clean up some of those edges too. Make it a little flatter. I'm not entirely happy with this thing. I was feeling a little too round. I want it to flow a little better, so I might bring some of that back. Get a better flow. Just take a look at it, see if I'm happy with the shape. Still kind of finicking with this thing. But the silhouette is important too. That's why I'm kind of spending a little time to get this right. Alright, let's go in there and fix that edge. And help it to feel a little bit more natural with some elements. But first, I'm going to play with the color. I'm not too happy with the color of this thing first. Felt a little too warm, so I take some reds out, maybe cool it a little bit more. Take a look at it. Man, it's feeling a little too cool. Just take a look at it again. Yeah, it's feeling a little too cool. Let's bring some warmth back a little bit. See if I'm happy with it. Take a look at it. Take some time to really judge. You know, don't rush into anything. This is an important element, so we're going to take some time to help it integrate. Alright, let's go fix those shrubs, the tree line there. So we're going to pick an element that has a nice edge to it with some detail of shrubs, and that one looks like it has a nice edge, and that's the kind of edge that we kind of want to mimic. So we're just going to close the rest of these files so it's not clogging up our our Photoshop here. We won't need these stuff anymore. Alright, now let's go look for a high contrast channel here. I'm going to go with the blue. Now you notice how this is a little noisier because it's a Google image search engine, so it's you can see the quality difference here, and it's going to be a little tricky. It's going to need a lot of cleanup to make this work, but I'll show you guys how to do that with Google Images too. So we're going to darken down. We're going to use the picker here that's for the dark, so we're going to pick a light value to make black, and that's what you're telling it. Now this is for the light values. Pick the light values there to just knock it back. It's going to turn those values that I picked into white. And that's another technique of creating a high contrast matte. Again, we're going to go into our burn tool here to kill a lot of this stuff. Now we're only looking for the edge, so I'm kind of wasting time doing it over there, but we want a nice edge, so I'm going to go around the edge area. Invert it, control select that, copy paste, and we're just going to copy that little section there for our edge. Maybe a little bit more, maybe for integration. Copy that over, bring it in, paste, and you can see what I'm talking about with the edge right here. And I'm going to show you how to get rid of this thing. And it's pretty much chromatic aberration. It's taking that one pixel line from the sky as well. If you don't have a high quality image where we have a lot of detail in. We're going to go to, what I did there was go to layer, matting, defringe, and it'll knock one pixel off that. It's still going to need a clean up, but it took us halfway there. So what I do is turn on transparency on that layer. So we're only painting on that. Now I'm going to take the clone tool here, and I'm going to select an area with color, current layer, select the area, and just paint in. And because it's on transparency, we're not painting anywhere outside, and just copying the color information back onto those bad pixels and cleaning it up essentially. And this is how I use Google image search when I have a bad image and the mat's kind of all over the place and dirty. This is the technique I use to clean it up, and we're going to get rid of all those white lines because we don't want any dirty edges. Sometimes I'll see a lot of matte painters kind of be sloppy and lazy, and they don't clean it up, and it shows. And just having that, the cleanup just makes your image a little cleaner, and you can zoom in at full res and see that there was no laziness and there was no sloppiness to this image, that everything was done right. And that's how you essentially clean an image that maybe lower res and not the best image from Google. You clean it up and make it usable again. So I'm going to scale it down and see where I want to place this to break up the line, and then I'm going to integrate it, transform it, I'm going to use a curve here to knock it down to put it in the same space as the hill, knock down those mids and the highs there, get it into the ballpark kinda. We're going to turn our hue and saturation on to judge it better, knock out all the color information to see where our black levels are. We want to match our black levels to the element that we're matching to. So the darkest dark of our hill should be the darkest, it should be the same value as our little tree line there. And that's important. That's going to help it sit in, because we don't want different black levels. It's going to look like two different elements. And because they're in the same, same point in space, they're going to have the same black levels. Color correcting, helping us in there. It was a little too saturated for our mood that we want to create. We want to suck a little bit of color out of that thing to help it sit. But we do, with our stylization, we do want to bring color back in some areas. And later on, we're going to paint back in some colors into that element, the hill element. And that's going to help our stylization as well. So not only are we stylizing the shapes of our elements, but also the color. So using a textured brush to help me kind of, not to get a hard edge, but almost like a textured brush to help those edges feel like shrubbery, not hard, not too soft. So you want to pay attention to that stuff too. Use a right brush for that element. We're not going to use a soft brush for this one because it just wouldn't make sense. We'd lose the edge detail that we wanted from that element to help us with our silhouette. Placing it, see where I like it, and kind of integrating into the element. It still needs a little bit of color correction, but we're going to first integrate it, and then so we can judge it a little better. I'm going to use a curve here to adjust it again, darken it down a little bit in the mids. Help it sit in there. Turn that hue and saturation on again to judge it a little better. You can judge things a lot better when, especially values, when you knock out the color for sure. It just makes it easier on your eyes to see that information. So I noticed the edge line in the sky there. Then I'm just going to go in my sky and figure out what layer is causing that. There, found it. It's from one of those horizon line elements. If I can paint this out here, and there you go. Clean that up. Now, this may not be the best element, but we're going to put it in and see if we can work with it, at least as a base. Maybe add more on top. Clean that up. We got a little bit of transparency left over. Clean up that edge. You see how it's helping that silhouette now feel a little bit more natural than our hard cut line. And we're going to do a lot more of these elements to help it. Sitting back to see how it's sitting there. Now, right now it's feeling a little green. And I want to keep a little bit of color in there, just in some spots. And we're going to use paint as well on that hill there. Let's go find some more elements we can use to help us. Again, we shot some of the shrubbery because I knew I was going to use it either in the foreground, or in this case, we're going to use it for the hill, just for a silhouette. Bring it in. Again, with the same process here to matte this out, we're going to look for a high contrast channel to see which is the best. And because there was a little bit of reflection on this, I'm going to use the red channel because it had the least contrast inside of that bush between the darks and lights inside of it. So just sample a light color on top of that bush to make it black. Gonna sample some sky and around surrounding areas values to make it white around it. Adjust it manually. Just push it a little bit more. I just want that edge, so I'm not concerned about that backwater. I'm gonna use the burn tool to burn some of those reflection layers that were a little too bright, and that if I sampled that tone, it may have jacked up everything else that we don't want. So we're gonna use the burn tool to burn that down and not hurt us any other way. I'm going to use the dodge tool here, and notice the range is set to highlights, so I'm really affecting the brights. It's not going to touch any of those dark values, even if I have light values on that dark, just slightly lighter. It's not going to affect that. Just going to hit a certain range. We just want the edge, so we're not concerned about that water. Invert our matte there. Control select, paste. Copy this. Copy it over to our hill here. It's huge because it's so high res. We're going to scale that down. See if we can create a nice silhouette for back there. And you can see how the matte is a lot cleaner from the image that we got from Google. So it still needs a little bit of work because it was against, some values against the water that it was in the sky. So that's why we have that 1 pixel edge. But we're going to use that defringe technique in a minute to get rid of that 1 pixel. You can see I'm layering. I'll select the layer first, not the mask, the clipping mask. Layer, matting, defringe, and you can set width 1 pixel. Boom, it's gone. Nice and easy. Now you see it doesn't need any more cleanup than that, and that's the advantage of shooting your own reference with a good camera. And I recommend that for you guys if you're serious about this business. Becoming a matte painter is essential to get a camera. Read some articles that Dylan Cole, probably one of the biggest matte painters out there, and awesome artist. He, I think it was for Alice in Wonderland. He was shooting some elements, some grass elements, and it's when Alice is really tiny, and he actually gets down, on the floor and shoots the elements, even in the same perspective. I mean, that's the extent that he goes through to get his elements, and you can see that's why his matte paintings are so tight and so clean, is because all his elements he shoots, or as much as he can, and they're just super tight. Can really push up our colors and grab nice matte. So if you want to take your work to the next level, I definitely recommend getting a good camera and shooting your own reference. Doesn't have to be the best camera in the world, but something that's not your typical point and shoot, but not exactly professional either. Helps a lot. Now we color corrected this, graded it down to fit into the values that we want to match with this hill here, and seeing how we can use this element. And you see I put it right over top the other one because I wasn't too happy with that. Now we might see how we can use both of them or just replace it completely. Helping integrate into that, and it's important to think about how that element is going to the other one. We're not just haphazardly slapping that in. We're trying to figure out how this blends into the other one, the shrubs coming out of the rock, making sure we're not painting over that, slapping it right over that rock. So we have a little bit of shrubs blending into that rock, and then something behind it. So just some things to keep in mind when you're using elements is to kind of stick to the structure of that element, just not slapping in elements and making it look photo bashed. See, checking our element, maybe move it to another area, see if it works a little better somewhere else than that one. Yeah, I kind of like maybe having that silhouette there work better for us. I really like the shape of those leaves. It's got a nice stylized feel to it. And again, because this is stylized, we can push things like that to get the look that we want. The scale of this thing may not be perfect, but we're making this up and it's stylized, so maybe there is this bush in this fantasy world that we're creating that's that big, but it looks like a tree from back here, so I'm gonna stick with it. I like the clean shapes it's creating there. Color correct it down. Yeah, I like that, and I like it how it's a little bit green, and you'll see how when we paint into the hill element that we have there, it's going to really pop some color into that. We don't want a monochromatic image. We're going to bring back color wherever we can, and that's coming from one of the reference images that we have that I showed you earlier on. It kind of had an overall overall mood to it with the colors, but it had some popping green in it. Looking for some other elements maybe we can use. This is all Google, reference images I collected for this project. And the ones I use I'm going to include in the project files in this so you can kind of follow along. I really like this tree line, and I want to put it behind the hill. So I'm going to look for a high contrast channel again. Happens to be the red. So throw the curves down, pick the picker, pull it down in those values, pick the lights, pull it up, create a nice high contrast, adjust it a little bit in those values in the darks there. We're good. I think we're good for a nice, use the dodge and burn tools here. I use my hotkeys. O is the hotkey there. Burn those in. I can also, pick that color with a brush and paint it in too. But, yeah, like I'm doing here. Makes it a little easier. Paint it in, but I'm going to use the burn tool for those edges just to make sure it's clean. Again, this image is from Google, so I'll most likely have to clean this up. Dodge the brights there. Get rid of that. Invert our selection. Control click it to select. Load to selection. Copy paste. Select what we want. Copy that over to our painting. And we're going to put this behind the hill because this is a tree line behind our hill element. Flip it. Yeah, that's where I want it, right there. Scale it up a little bit. Now this image was low res and we're scaling it up, and it can pixelate the image, and whenever possible we want to stick to keeping the same resolution in our elements that we bring in, because we don't want that stark contrast. We have this super sharp image and then we have a blurry element beside it. That can kill our matte painting for sure. So, and because we're scaling this image down, it's 5K, we're going to go down to, you know, something reasonable like 2K. We have a little leeway too. We're going to clean this element up, matting, defringe 1 pixel. Help us out a little bit, and it's going to take some more cleanup. So I'm going to turn on transparency again, sample that color, and just paint into it. And again, because our transparency is on that layer, it's not going to paint anywhere outside, and we can, you know, confidently and loosely just sample the colors here to get rid of that chromatic aberration, a little bit of that sky color in the back. I'm just going to copy it. It doesn't have to be, you know, perfect, because we're going to grade this down for this, you know, particular purpose. So we're just going to put value and color in there so we don't have this white edge. So I'm not going to, you know, stress about, oh, does this look like a tree or is it a shadow area and stuff like that. We just want to put some color information in those 1 pixel areas and get rid of that nasty magenta, because that'll kill us when we start, you know, pushing and pulling this thing. Wow, yeah, look at that nasty purple. We'll get rid of all that stuff. Yeah, clean this up a little bit. I want to show you guys this stuff, you know, real time, because later on we're going to speed through it because you'll be pros by then, but it's good to see how to clean up bad images that you find online, make it, you know, usable again, because we're not always going to get lucky and use high-res images every single time. Let's clean that area up a little bit. I'm going to use a different brush with a little bit of tooth to it so I can simulate that sharp tree silhouette there in the element. Clean it up again. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just good enough so it's not just a hard edge. We can shape it just a little bit. And yeah, I take my time doing this stuff because I don't want to be lazy. This stuff does matter, and it's good to kind of develop these habits of not being lazy and paying attention to those stuff, to kind of sharpen your eye to do that stuff. Create a clipping mask with a curve adjustment layer so it only affects that element. I'm going to pull the lights down, grade it down. This is going to be pretty dark. Curve down the mids here. Use our desat to knock out the color to judge the black levels again a little better. I'm going to use this adjustment layer for color. Throw it on top, maybe change it to color because I don't want to affect the values that I have set up here with my other curve. Pull out the reds. It's a little too warm in the shadows. Pull that out to cool it down a little bit. That cool down that fill light. Bump up the blues in those values. Help it sit a little bit better. Feels like it needs to just knock the color out a little bit. It's a little too saturated. Knock that down. Yeah, it's starting to sit in there a little bit. A little better. The other thing that hue and saturation does when you desat it, it refreshes your eye pretty much with color. You'll see, like, if you turn it on and off, you stare at the grayscale image of it, and then you turn it off after, looking at it for a minute or so, the colors really pop in your stand out to you. You know, if something's wrong, you really notice it. So it's good also as a refresher. I do that a little bit, you know, when I'm trying to judge color and I'm like, something's off, I don't know what it is. You know, I'll turn that on to kind of refresh my eye and reboot my color sensitivity. I'm going to save it. And this part of the video I sped up a little bit so that, you know, you're not looking at the same thing over and over and over again, but we're going to be doing the same exact things. I'm trying to use this element again. Maybe I can use it somewhere else. Integration. Integrate it back into the element. Bring some color back into that thing. Curve it down. Felt a little too light. A little too warm. Go back and adjust it. Try to make this element work for us. I may, bring back some of that play too, because it had some nice edge detail there in the original hill element. Judging it, looking at it, see if anything pops out at us. No, let's go to a different element here. We're going to use this element here. Another Google image, find a high contrast. I really like the shape of this element. It really looks stylized already. And it's also a tropical plant, so it fits into our theme that we're going for. This element is pretty low res, so it's going to take a little bit more cleanup. And again, I'm going to show you, how to even use elements like this to your advantage. You can see it already starting to pixelate as we kind of dodge and burn that stuff. And I'm going to take my time with this element. It's going to take a little bit longer because it's such a low res image and kind of poor quality, but I think it's worth taking a look at how I use, even poor elements like this and being able to use it. I love the shape of this thing, and maybe I couldn't find, a higher res image that was like this, straight on, that I can use. So I kind of stuck with this element, so I'm going to try to make it work for me. But it will take a little bit of time to clean it up. Grading it down, dodging and burning, trying to create some high contrast edges here. And you can see even some of the inside stuff we're getting some values in there that we're gonna probably have to go in with a paintbrush and paint in. And yeah, it's gonna take a little bit of painting to get this element to work, and but I think it's worth it because I really like the shape of this element. Maybe I couldn't find another element like this, so it's worth taking the time to use it. And this is how, if you do find a really good element that you think you like, you can kind of make it work to your advantage. And the other thing I do is once I create, a matte for this image in particular, I'll save it as a PSD so that I never have to pull this matte again. So I only do it once. If I do another one of these beach paintings, down the road, all I have to do is open up that PSD and it already has my alpha in there. So I just copy paste and boom, it's done. So it may be worth spending the time to clean this up at the beginning, because then I'll have this element matted perfectly later on in the future if I need to use it for any other matte painting. I think we cleaned it up enough. Go into our matting, defringe 1 pixel to get rid of just that edge. Here you can see me saving that PSD like I was talking about. I'm going to try to use for the edge. It's got a really nice silhouette to it. As you'll see when I curve this down, it's got a real nice shape to it that I really like. I'm going to knock that down a lot. It's a little further away, so it's going to have less color information. And I just want it for the silhouette. I'm going to paint in the integration there. I'm not just going to slap it in. Paint in maybe, this element is coming out of those rocks. Grade that down a little bit more. Take out some of those worms, cool it down a little bit to help it sit with the rest of our bushes there. Yeah, you can see it's got a really nice design to it and really clean silhouette. Really like that. I'm going to reuse it here. Why not? Put it on top of that element because that element was kind of lacking in shape and silhouette. Let's grade that down a little bit more. What I'm doing here is I just duplicated my hill layer without adjustments, and I'm going to create pretty much a top light for this thing. So I screened it on, I'm pulling out the blacks right now and pulling up the whites a little bit, so when you screen it on, the darker values disappear and only the lighter values remain. And I'm going to color correct it, take out the warmth because I'm cooling it, so that top light is going to come from the sky, which is cool. And I'm going to put a clipping mask, invert it, and take a nice soft brush and paint in where that top light's going to hit, just to add a little bit more form that that in our element. It was feeling a little bit flat, so this creates a little bit more form and shape. Those top facing surfaces are going to catch a little bit more top light from the sky. As you see what kind of difference it made when I turn it on and off. Just adds a little bit more form into our element. And you always want to keep that in mind, is that just because you color correct the element down doesn't mean it's got the lighting perfectly in it. There's always room for more. Just adding a little bit more form in there really helped that element not look flat. Kind of organized our shrubs into a group. Now we're going to start our painting process I was telling you about. I'm going to pick a nice green color that's close to our element and just a little bit more saturated to push that stylization and color and make things pop back there, and it really helps it to get away from that monochromatic look. So I'm just painting, maybe there's a mossy area in that section, get rid of that, but mossy flat top rock. I'm gonna use a nice brush with some texture to it to create some nice edge detail to this, and I'm going to set my eraser to that brush too, so when I erase back into it, it creates nice edges. And that's important because it's giving me stuff for free. It's giving me that kind of realistic look of that breakup in the edges just from that brush. I'm going to create another plane here. Again, micro composition, stuff that we talked about, not just one big plane, but maybe there's another smaller one beside it. Evaluating if that color is a little too bright. It may be a little too bright. Yeah, just knock it down to help it sit in there, but it still kind of pops. So I like that. So I'm going to put a little bit more in the micro composition there. Not just one, maybe a little bit more here and there. Maybe some, overgrowth and vines, coming out of this thing. So some moss overgrowing on top of this thing. Make it look overgrown and weathered a little bit. So I picked a scatter brush, I put a little bit of scattering in it, changed the angle jitter, and what I did here was turn on color dynamics and turn up the hue, saturation, and brightness jitter, so that when I'm painting, the hue, saturation, and brightness change. And that's going to add a little bit of realness to it as when you zoom out and you look at that, it's got a little bit of change in it that helps with the realism, Nothing in reality is one flat color. There's always a gradation or change in value, and that's kind of what I'm trying to simulate with that color dynamics. Painting and maybe some overgrown. Again, that integration on top with the other elements that I painted in to integrate that color into it, so it's not such a jarring jump. Painting it in, maybe in that that brightness jitter that I put on the color dynamics, that brightness makes it seem as if some of those bushes or leaves or whatever it is or moss is catching a little bit more reflection. Maybe it's wet and it's catching a little bit more light than the other ones, and that little bit of jitter really helps it create a lifelike thing. And when I zoom in, it looks like paint, but at this stage, and that's when we size down our canvas to 2K, we're gonna look at it this way, and you can't tell what it is. It looks like real information in there. That's another reason why we paint big, so that when we scale down, all our paint pixels kind of mash in and work together. Yeah, I really like that color there. Really helps that element come out of that monochromatic color correction. Rename it, start organizing it so we know which layer is what. And we're going to add a little bit of atmosphere, sample the horizon line, pick a nice cloud brush that's in that set that I showed you guys earlier, and just use it as an eraser too, kind of erasing in and painting in where we want it, just to knock that back a little bit and create a little bit more depth through atmospheric perspective. And maybe that fog is creeping up on this hill. Just set it back a little bit in space. It felt like it was a little too desat, so I'm going to increase the saturation of it, and this helps it sit in. So even when you sample a color off the sky, keep in mind, sometimes it may come in a little too warm or desat. Don't be fooled. Like, you don't just pick a really light color and paint it in there because you think the atmosphere is that color. So I think we're happy with this. We're gonna save this off and jump to the next step here in a minute.